so this is what the little guy will look like when we're finished. I have my 3 colors that I'm going to do my background in. Right here, they're blush pink, sea glass, and white. I'm just going to move this aside. So we're going, I already, these little canvases that I get from the dollar store, they aren't pre-primed. So we have to prime them a little bit before we start. So I did put a couple of coats of white on here just so everybody knows how I prepped it. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of white just to get this a little bit wet. And I'm going to cover the whole thing with 1 coat just to get the whole thing kind of wetted down. Okay, then I'm just going to clean off. Let's see if I can get all of this in here. I'm just going to clean that off onto my paper towel. I'm not going to wet it or anything. I'm just cleaning it off of there. And I'm going to dip into my pink. Now let's go green first. Let's go green first. So I'm going to place my green kind of where I want it. And I mean, you can place this wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. It's all up to you what your placement will be. And I'm making it so it covers pretty good. And then I'm just going to clean that off of there. I am going to wet it this time and get that green off of there. And then I'm going to dip into my blush pink. I love this color. And I'm going to fill in all the other sort of spots in here that we didn't cover with the green. And I'm not being particular because we're going to go over this in a second and kind of blend it all together. All right, I'm going to clean my brush again. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of white on my brush. And I'm just going to start to blend all of that in here. And I'm just going to keep grabbing some white just to kind of tone it down a little bit. And you can clean off on your paper towel as often as you need because sometimes it'll get a little thick with paint and it will affect how your blend goes. So I'm just cleaning that excess off of my brush, trying to hold this while I do this so I don't send the canvas across the room. And we'll just grab a little more white and we'll just come over it again, tone those down. And then we're going to give this a good dry before we bring our line drawing over. So that's basically it to get that kind of muted pastel colors on the back. Okay, so let's get my dryer out. Okay, so let's bring this over here, and don't pay mind to my line drawing. It's pretty rough compared to the one you got. Not near as pretty, but it'll work. All right, so he pretty much fits the whole canvas. I have to find a way to get that, there we go, get that under there. So we're going to go ahead and put his ears on, and I'm going to put both of these sections on here. I'm not doing his eyes just yet, or his nose. I'm just doing this outer portion here. Got a little wiggly there. And his arms. The heart. I'm not worrying about these little division lines where his arms are either, right this second. And then the bottom of that heart. And I'm not going to put those lines on the heart just yet. I think that's pretty good. All right, so we can start with some honey brown. We'll get that part blocked in first. And I'm going to grab my liner brush because I need to get in these smaller little areas up in here. So we'll do that first, just on that bottom part of his ear. All right, so we have that tiny little spot in there, and I'll grab a bigger brush to get this next part. So his head is also honey brown. And I'll grab my smaller brush to get in those little corners here. And we'll do his legs. We'll just get this little tiny part in here first before I bring out my bigger brush, since I have it in my hand already. So you'll most likely need another coat of this. Once we dry this, we'll be able to see better, but most likely we'll need to add a second coat, just like normally we have to. Usually doesn't cover with the first one. just doing his body in the same color. We have some little tiny spots to get into down here. Now I painted my heart with blush pink. You can paint it any color you want. If you want to do a red heart, I mean, you can absolutely do that. It doesn't have to be the same color as what I've painted it. Express yourself in your own painting. All right, I'm just going to flip him so I can get these last little couple spots in here. A very wiggly hand tonight. Paw just keeps getting bigger. All right, clean those brushes off, and the top part of his ears and his face here are done with some desert sand. So we'll get that out. Whoops. We can fix that on our second coat of honey brown for sure. Need a little oops there. Okay. And we'll just do those top parts of those ears with the same color. And then I think I'm going to give the whole thing a good dry. Oh, maybe I'll try and get his heart done before I do dry. And we'll dry it all at one time. All right, so like I said, I did my heart in, let's flip this around so I can get my blush pink. I did my heart in blush pink, but as I said, you don't have to do yours in this color if you don't want to. Just bringing out the smaller brush to get in these tiny areas here. Okay, so there's our first coat on there. And we'll give this guy a good dry. He doesn't look like a whole lot right now. Okay, second coat always kind of goes on a little faster. We'll just get that on here so we can start doing some shading. All right, now we'll go into our honey brown. Almost there. And then we'll just put another coat on our heart. And then we should be good to go for some shading and stippling and all the things we have to do here. Back to my pink around this corner. All right, that should do it. And we'll dry him up again. Dry. All right. So with our shading, we're gonna be shading with a lot of burnt umber on this little guy. So we'll get that out. I'm going to flip this paper towel over. I'm going to try and bring it in here so that I can show you what I'm doing at the same time, because I know you all have asked me to show exactly how I do this shading. So my angled brush, I normally use a 3/8 inch angled brush, just simply have a 1/2 inch on my table, so that's what I'm using now. But I'm going to dip the corner of that just that pointed corner of my brush into my paint, and I'm just going to work it back and forth and get that paint in that little corner worked in there. Let's see if I can bring in some water as well. So then I dip into my water, and then I tap off the excess water onto my paper towel. Now I may have to do that a couple times. If I come over here and find that I've brought too much water off of my brush, I'll go back in and put some more on. So I can see that, that might be a bit dark. So I just come back into my water, tap it off, and that will make your paint move a little bit better. Shading is all about getting the right amount of water on and paint on your brush. Water is a huge factor in getting it just quite right. Now that might be pretty light. We can come back in and do a second coat after it dries. But I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to reload my brush, dip in my water, tap it off, and we're just going to go on to the next place. So I'm going to come in here just above his head. And that, I didn't have to re-wet my brush. This is flowing quite nicely off my brush right now, so I didn't have to worry about dipping again. And I'm going to shade along this bottom edge of the little flipped over part on his ears. And I'm just going to keep going until the paint kind of runs out of my brush, because it's flowing nicely out of there. And I may have to darken this one up a bit, because we'll just add a little more because it kind of ran out. Okay. So now I want to come up the sides of his face a little bit. So I'm going to reload my brush, dip in my water, tap off, and come over here. And that's, a little bit dark and it's kind of dragging. So I'm just going to add a little more water, tap it off until it flows nicely off my brush. I hope this is making sense to you. And really, shading is a lot of practice. So you can try this technique and practice it, and it will help you immensely, I think. We're just going to add some over in here. Now, if there's too much water, you'll get, a little puddle of water on your, like I just did. So I just tapped off on my paper towel again. Okay, so that's that part. Now this one here kind of faded out a bit. I'm just going to darken it up. We'll smooth this one out. And then we'll move on to this portion of his face. So loading my paint, dipping in my water, tapping off. And I'm going to go around the whole thing. So that's dragging just a little bit. So I'm going to put a little bit more water on my brush. And we'll reload because it's quite a long run, this one. So in the water, tapping off. A little too dark. You can tell when it starts to drag or it's quite dark like that. You want to add a little more water to your brush. There we go. We'll bring this around. So it's, again, starting to drag a little bit. So I want to get a little more water. Take the excess off on my paper towel. And that's what this little project is here for, is to practice your shading. And we're going to be doing a bit of stippling too. So That's what this little project is for, so you can practice all these things. What else was I going to say to you? I forget now. It'll come back to me. So we're doing the same thing. We're going to reload, and I'm going to come down this side of his arm here. And like I said, your first coat of shading doesn't have to be it. Just get that first coat on there. If it's too light, don't worry about that. You know, you can add a little bit more once it's dried. And I mean, you can layer up your shading several times. You don't have to stop at once or twice. You know, you can touch up your shading as you go, and until you're happy with how it looks. So I'm just going to bring that little line down here from his arm to his body. And I'm going to get a little more water on my brush there. And we have a bit of shading to do around this heart, but I'm going to leave that right this second because it's wet in here. And if it's still wet, I'll just pull that off and instead of trying to put more on, because I'm going to go over it. So I just kind of leave that be for a second. We'll come over here and do that side. And then I still have paint in my brush, so I'm just going to come over here, and now it's run out. So we're going to reload, dip in the water, tap off, and carry on. All right, reload. And we'll come along the outer edge of his arm here. Now his foot kind of is over top of here. That's why I stopped there. All right, reload, add our water, tap off, and we'll come in and do his foot. Too much water. I had a little puddle there, so I just tapped off onto my paper towel again. Like I said, it's the right kind of mix of paint and water on your brush when you're shading. So let's get in this little spot, and we'll come along the side of the heart here, and then we'll go over and do the other foot. Load a little bit. And believe me, when I first started doing this, there was a lot of frustration with my shading as well. You're not alone. It's, like I said, it just takes practice, and you're guaranteed not going to get it on the first try. If you do, all the power to you. But I know I didn't when I first started. It's just repeating these little projects and things like this that will help you practice getting it so that you're happy with it. And sorry for all the spinning. I just want to see now that this is dried, it's faded down a bit. So I can come back in and add another little bit there. I'm just going on the other side of that little division. So I'm going to dry this because I want to come under his chin and I want to go around the heart. So I'm going to dry it a little bit so I can safely do all those. All right, so let's get this last little bit of brown on here, and then I'll check and see what you're all saying. Okay. So we'll go around. That's a bit dark, so I'm going to just add a bit of water tap it off onto my paper towel and then carry on here. Okay. So at this point, you know, you could dry it, and anywhere that you wanted to add a little more of that brown shading, if you feel like it's faded out too much in some areas, then, you know, by all means, we'll dry it quickly. And then, you know, if you want to come in here, if you see any spots that require a little bit more, just reload the same way and spruce those up a little bit. You know, you don't have to. And I mean, you can even reshade and touch up your shading after you're finished your whole painting. It doesn't have to be right now at this step. You know, it can be touched up at any time. So there, we just added another bit to the muzzle, and you know, you can do it wherever you want. Add a second bit. All right, let me just see what you're all saying here. All righty. The trick to keep graph paper from making a mess on your canvas when you trace. Well, could be a couple of reasons that's happening. Let me just bring my face up here. So who asked me that? Debbie Benson Jones. So there could be a couple of reasons why that's happening. It's because you have a brand new piece of the graphite paper, so it's got lots of that stuff on there. And the best thing to do for that is take some off. So you can rub it onto just a plain piece of white paper and get some of that excess off there. I know it sounds crazy, you know, you have a brand new piece of graphite paper and you're trying to take some off, but sometimes it's really smudgy when you first get it. This piece right here, I've been using over and over and over again because you can use them so many times, but you can see mine has got a lot of lines on it, but it's almost right at a perfect place right now where it doesn't smudge. So I think mostly, and it might also be another reason is that your palm, or you're using, when you're tracing, you're hitting your palm or your hand on it and it's leaving that mark under there. So just try to be light-handed with your hand resting on your graphite paper. Hopefully that helps. And then, I mean, again, if I do get any smudges, I use my white gum eraser and I just push really hard and erase it off. Sometimes, though, you might have to paint over top of any smudges. But, you know, I've been there myself. I know I've had that same thing happen. Your Jan Spalding. Your fine line bristles seem to get all spread out. I'm always getting a new one. I'm thinking maybe the way I clean them. Yeah, it could very well be. If you scrub really hard, like mine, I abuse mine too, Jan. Don't think that I don't. I'm forever trying to get them reshaped myself. But I think if you scrub them on the bottom of your water bin, that really will play havoc on them because there's so few bristles in here. So usually what I try to do, and I'm not really diligent at it, is to, after you're finished using them, I kind of try to reshape them by, I turn my brush in my hand like this and hold the bristles and kind of bring them back to a point again. You can see mine right here. I have a lot of paint in the ferrule and I'm abusive to my brushes, but sometimes if you do that, and or run it under a tap of hot water and then do this to try and reshape them, That will sometimes help. Hopefully that helps you out. We'll see if that works for you. But yes. Jan does a lot of touch-ups on her shading. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Mary Lou, that's like shading is like the brings it all to life. Terry has a challenge of getting her shading wide enough. It's always too thin. Yeah, so there again, with your first coat, and really what's happening there, Terry, is you're working it too hard. Now I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you exactly what's happening to you when you do that. Let me just do a little demo here. I don't even know what I can do a demo on. Let's do it on the back of this. Okay, so if you take your brown shade and this is going to be a terrible example because I need a piece of canvas. I don't want to wreck my little painting. Let's open up this canvas here. So, like I said, it's a matter of you're working it too much. And I've done that too, where it kind of does that to me because I've overworked my shade line. So let's get this canvas out here and we'll stop messing around. All right, here we go. So we'll put this on here. And there, if that's a nice float right there. But if I go back into my water and I work it again and again and again and again, do you see how thin it's getting? And if you keep working it, you're going to keep getting that line thinner and thinner and thinner until you just have that really thin line, like you just could have taken your liner brush and done that. So I think the thing to do is to bring your shade on here. Now I have a lot of water in my brush, but let's bring this shade on here beside this one. And I'm just lightly doing that. More paint on here. And let it be. You see how I'm saying how it's nice and wide? And I think that's where your problem is, because you're just you're being very meticulous and you're trying to get it right, I think, and you're overworking it. So hope that helps, Terry. You can try that. All right. Okay, I think that's it for questions for the moment. So we'll go back to this little guy. You're welcome, Jan. Okay, so where are we at here? What's next? Let us, looking at my painting here. Okay, let's do a little dry brushing with some marigold on our honey brown, just to give him a little texture on there. All right, let's use this. I'll clean this out because I didn't, obviously, the last time I used it. Okay, bear with me while I clean brushes. Okay, so I'm just going to grab a little bit of marigold on this little lunar blender. Again, you can always use a stencil brush. Anything with a stiff bristle I like to use for dry brushing. If you have a better method or a different method, you can use whichever one you like. So I'm just kind of getting a little bit in under there. Probably won't see it a whole lot, but I'm just going to kind of in a circular way here, put this on all the honey brown parts. And the same thing with your dry brushing. Try and put it on in thin coats and layer it up. If it's not bright enough on the first pass, don't worry about that. Just leave it and come back to it and put a second coat on it. And the second coat will usually brighten it up. if you try to go too thick with it on the first pass, it usually will end up smudging and you won't be happy with it. You just want to put a nice light dusting of dry paint on there each layer. And I mean, I'm often too, when I'm dry brushing, I'll layer up 3, 4, 5 times till I'm happy. I mean, I like to dry brush. I think it adds a lot to your painting, but I layer up on mine all the time. So see, we can come back here if I wanted to put a second layer on this, and then it'll brighten it right up. So it just brings it out a little bit more each layer you put on. Again, that's all personal preference too. You don't have to, you know, put all those layers on if you don't want to. It's entirely up to you. All right, what's next here? So I think what we'll do is we'll do a little bit of stippling. Now I used a 1/4 inch. Again, I didn't clean it. Not prepared for class. I used a little 1/4 inch because this is a tiny little painting and I have a lot of little tiny spots in here to get to. So I use this little one. So I'm going to stipple with a little bit of, I think I'm going to use some buttermilk. So let me see if I can move over my plate so you can see what I'm doing in that little, let me get rid of me again. Okay, so in the buttermilk, I'm going to dip straight in with my stencil brush, and then I'm going to offload it just to get some of that excess off of there. You don't want a big goop of it. You just want to have a little dusting of it on the end of your brush. And then I'm going to stipple these little tiny desert sand areas. And I'm just using a really light touch because I don't want to, you know, go too crazy with this. I just want a nice little light, and you can go over the edge a little bit to make him, this just kind of makes him look fuzzy a little bit, like he's fluffy. So you can just put a little, just a smidge over the edge. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. And then we'll do his little muzzle, same way. Just offload that, and then we'll do, and you know, don't rush it because we want to just have a light touch and make it nice and even. And don't worry about getting it all on there in the first pass. If you have to come back later and put another little bit on here in a second coat, acrylic paint is all about kind of layering things up. We do all of these little paintings in layers. So he's just, with every layer, he kind of takes on a different look. So about that much for like the first pass, and we'll leave that. I'm also going to just lightly put a little bit of, let me get some more paint on here. Put a little bit on his head. Again, this is just to kind of make him look a little bit fluffy. And we'll reload, and you can put a little bit on his arms. And I'm not covering the whole thing. I mean, you could if you wanted to. I'm just kind of giving a little illusion of a little bit of fluffy here and there. I'll put some on his paws. And his feet. And as you run out of paint, just reload the same way. And we'll put a little on his chest. Give him a little chest hair. And at this point now we can kind of, if you wanted to add a second coat to any of this, you could come back in and even this out a little bit if you need to. It's looking pretty good there. All right, so I think that's pretty good. Fine, fine. Okay. All right, so now we can, I'm going to just dry this because it might be a little bit wet, and then I'm going to bring his eyes and his nose over. We're pretty close to being finished, this little guy, so he doesn't take very long to paint, and I've been talking in between doing all this stuff. So, I mean, it's only not even been an hour yet, so I mean, he paints up pretty fast, and it's a good way to practice all of your different things like your shading, a little bit of stippling in there. All right, let's bring this over. Get it lined up, and we'll add his eyes and nose. Get those based in there. All right, I can see it. So we're just going to base this with some black. And I'm just going to use my liner brush to get these in place. The eyes are a little bit tiny, so I'm just going to fill those right in just with my liner. All right. And then we'll outline his nose, and then I'll fill it in. Whoops. I might have just made his nose just another little bit bigger by doing that. My round brush. Okay, now he has a nose and some eyes. We'll dry that. And we only have a little bit left to do on the bear. Hello, Angela. Going good? All right. Okay, so before we shade, well, let's do that first. Let's shade his eyes a little bit here and his nose. Hopefully it's dry enough. I'm going to grab a little bit of white and load my brush with that. Dip in my water, and we'll put a little shade right across the top of his nose. And I want it to be a little bit wide like that. There we go. So we have his highlight on his nose, and we're going to just do a little bit on the left side of each of these little eyes. So we don't need very much on our brush. A little bit of white here, and it's too dark, so I'm just going to dip back into my water so that it moves a little better on my brush or on my surface. And then we'll do the left side with a little highlight on each. We're going to come back and put some dots in here after too, but I won't do that yet, so because I don't want to get my hands in it. All right, so I'm going to shade this little heart with some red. So I'm just going to use my Tuscan red. That's what I have in my hand, yes. All right, so we have our red there. We're going to load the exact same way we did before. Just back and forth. We're going to dip in our water. We've got our water out of view again. Dip in our water and take the excess off on our paper towel. And then come over here and just go along this bottom edge right there. Now that one came off pretty well off my brush, so I didn't have to add more water to it. So, I mean, sometimes it just works out. Sometimes you have to add a little more water or take some off. I mean, it's all a crapshoot each time you kind of do it. But there again, this one's not so bad either. It's kind of coming off nicely. So I'm just going to keep right on going. And then we can go around. Let me dry those first because I don't want to pull them off because they did kind of go on there nicely. And now we can go a little bit around. I still had some on my brush, so I'm just going to use that. I'm going to go around his paws a little bit. Okay, so we'll dry that and we'll put some stripes on our heart. Okay, so I'm just going to use my liner brush. I'm going to flip this around and grab my white on this side. Got a whole whack of white here that I didn't really need all that, but on there now. So I'm just adding a little water to my brush and dipping it back in the paint because I want this to be a little bit inky so that it flows off the brush nicely. Now you could bring your line drawing over and put your stripes back on. I'm just going to freehand mine, hope for the best. If they don't come out perfect, you won't judge me. I know you won't. You might, but you won't tell me. Okay. And again, if you don't want stripes on your little cookie here or whatever it is, you don't have to put them on. You can put a different design or dots or whatever you want. Whatever makes you happy. But this little project, again, now you're getting a little bit of line work. We'll just add a little more water to that. And we'll turn this way and go the other way. All right, so there's our little pattern on there. We'll dry that. Yeah, you could put somebody's name on it too. That's a good idea, Laura. Good idea. Especially too if he was a little bit, if you made this painting a little bit bigger and put it on a bigger canvas or on something, you would have a lot more room on your heart. Okay. So let's come back around here to our red. I want to, because we put these little lines on here, I just want to cover up those edges of them so they're not kind of sticking out there. So I'm just going to add a little more red. Kind of like when we're doing gnome beards, how we have to get rid of those rough edges after we do the hairs. I'm just kind of settling this back in behind there. And then I'm going to put a little white highlight onto the top. I'm just adding some white to my brush. And I'm all discombobulated, dipping in my water again, taking off the excess. And we'll go across the top here. All right. So, I mean, if you like the way your bear looks right now, you don't have to do anything more. I'm going to put a few little stray hairs on him. If you don't like that look, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. If you don't like that look of those little stray hairs on there, but you like this look better, stop there. I mean, you don't have to put those on if you don't want to. But I'm going to put them on just for the sake of putting them on there. But if you don't like that look, then don't put them on. It's all good. So I'm going to grab a little bit of white onto my brush again. Let's flip back around here. There we go. Going to get a little bit of water in that paint. I just want to add some nice tiny little fine lines. All right, so you can kind of come in here with the white and add a few little hairs in there. He's kind of cute without them. I kind of like them both ways. And then you can bring some in on his head. You can add some here just by his ears. He reminds me of one of those little TY bears. Do you remember those, you guys? The little TY bears? And then likewise, wherever we kind of stippled a little bit, you can add a few little fuzzy hairs or little lined hairs. Okay, give him some on his chest, a few little chest hairs. I'm not going to do his muzzle though. I didn't want to kind of overwhelm the whole thing with too many of these little. And I kind of like the way his nose and everything looks just like that. Again, personal preference. You can choose to paint yours however you like. So we're just going to finish these little last few little hairs. We're going to give him some eye dots, and he's pretty much done. Okay, so as for eye dots, I'll just use my liner brush. And wherever you put the first one, you're going to place the second one in the same place so that he, on the other eye, so he doesn't look cross-eyed. And then I put a little dot kind of in the corner of his eyes. Just a tiny one. And that's that. Now I think in the first one I did add a few little tiny white dots to the background. I'm going to bring these both in, but I'm not going to do that on this one. I don't think I missed anything. Okay. So that's my demo, and this is the one we did tonight. So a little bit lighter on the muzzle here, and I think the reason was I added a little bit of white stipple on top of that. So let's do that and see if it changes him up any. So we'll just get our little stencil brush out, and yeah, I think I added an extra layer of white on there. So there again, we did desert sand first, stippled with buttermilk, and then, you know, you can, with third layer, the next layer, you can stipple with a little bit of white, because you can see the difference that it made in how it looked. Put a little on there. I kind of like that. All right, there you have it.